For the last 2 years in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton has seen off the challenge of Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. Looking ahead to 2019, which we're already doing at Autosport, and I'm sure the teams are as well, Formula One never stops. We're looking at what Hamilton should be focused on next year. Where is the threat coming from, and is it just going to be Vettel again? I've got Autosport's F1 reporter Scott Mitchell with me and F1 racing editor Ben Anderson. Scott, I'll come to you first. Is Hamilton's mission over the winter to work out how to beat Vettel again, or does he need to start casting his gaze a little bit further afield and maybe some new threats emerging?
I think he's already started to look at the sort of next generation coming through. He's aware that he's going to be the third oldest guy on the grid next year.
Which seems mad. How can Lewis Hamilton?
It's crazy, isn't it? And he's actually, also, I think he's only going to be 33. He's actually quite young.
Past it.
Yeah.
But you were right. You said at the top of the video, he's beaten Vettel 2 years in a row now. He knows he's got him covered. He's not had any challenge from Bottas in 2018. He knows he's got him covered. He doesn't have to worry about Daniel Ricciardo anymore. He's out the picture probably because he's going to be at Renault now. So it's going to be right. What about the new guy at Ferrari, Leclerc? What about Verstappen? Is Red Bull and Honda going to put something together to let him have a season-long title battle? So that's what Hamilton's focus is, and he's already talked about how he needs to work out, right, what have I got to do, because these guys are younger than me, they're hungrier than me in some way, so what do I need to do to stay on top?
The good thing in Hamilton's regard, though, is that he's aware of these threats, isn't he? Like he's seen a little bit of what Verstappen's about. We all know what Verstappen's about. They've come to, well, not quite blows, but they've had battles on track towards the end of last season, so he's already working out Max. The big unknown is Leclerc, because he's the guy coming up into a new team, and that will be probably the one, in terms of expending energy on working out, that he'll probably spend the most time on, I would have thought. Yeah,
we'll stick with Leclerc for the moment. If we're looking at the impact he could have on Hamilton, as of course he's going to be in the same house effectively as Vettel, do we think that Leclerc can instantly provide a threat to Vettel and therefore also become a thorn in the side of Hamilton? And if so, what is it about him and what we've seen from him in the junior ranks and in a phenomenal breakout year at Sauber that perhaps makes us convinced that he can do the business?
I think the thing that Leclerc needs to do first and foremost is there's a minor qualifying weakness he needs to address, because he was the worst this year at stringing together his theoretical best in qualifying.
So putting all the sectors together on one lap.
He did it 3 times in 21 qualifying sessions. On the other side of the garage in 2019 is going to be Vettel, who has the best record for doing that. He did it 11 times. So in the midfield, okay, maybe every now and again it cost him a place on the grid or something like that, but he averaged out losing, I think, over a tenth on every qualifying lap over the year. That's make or break when it's Mercedes versus Ferrari versus Red Bull in qualifying. So Leclerc needs to make sure he puts himself in a position to actually be ahead of Vettel and to take the fight to Hamilton, assuming Mercedes stays in front. So we need to see whether or not he can do that, because there was still evidence that he wasn't quite getting the most out of it at the end of the year. To me, that's the big sort of unknown over Leclerc, whether he can do that. What we did see this year is when he puts himself and he gets himself into that track position, he's amazing. His racecraft's superb, he's relentless, he's consistent, he's got everything he needs. It's just we need to see what he's capable of doing when he's, right up against it, against much sort of higher quality opposition.
Yeah. Ben, are we expecting too much from Leclerc making the jump from Sauber to Ferrari, or does the track record of drivers such as Hamilton in 2007 and Verstappen when he got his promotion mid-season to Red Bull in 2016, if you're that good, you do just hit the ground running in these good teams, don't you?
Yeah, to an extent. I think it's good to see that Ferrari have followed that lineage. Finally, yes, and they've taken a punt on a young driver without much experience. But I think, that said, their environment is probably the least set up historically of the top teams to cope with a driver in that scenario. So I think we have to be careful about how much expectation we place on Leclerc in the early part of the season. He's not going into an environment that is well schooled in drilling new drivers without experience in the same way Red Bull was with Verstappen, and McLaren with Hamilton is a special case. I mean, he was groomed for a long time for that seat. So bearing in mind what Scott said about Leclerc's qualifying weakness, that will hurt him in the battle at the front, and I don't expect that he'll be on top of Vettel to start with, maybe not at all. What is crucial is how Vettel responds to his slightly lacklustre end to the last season. His qualifying form has always been his strength, and if Vettel can come back with his head properly in the game, he should take another step forward, and that means the target Leclerc is aiming at now might not be the same one come 2019.
The other thing with the Ferrari threat for Hamilton is it could well be divided. because if Vettel doesn't come out swinging next year and Leclerc gets a little bit of a hold on him, I'm not entirely convinced Leclerc could do a full season's title challenge. I think he's probably quick enough to. It's just whether
it's those little details, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's a bit too soon for that.
And those are the things that Hamilton's become the master at, of course.
Exactly. So you're going to have Lewis is going to go out, and you don't expect him to be any worse than this season. And in my opinion, this was the best Lewis we've seen in F1. Yeah. So if he's at that level, you've got Leclerc sometimes getting ahead of Vettel, Leclerc sometimes winning races. The Ferraris, and we haven't seen this for I don't remember since 08, something like that. We might see the Ferraris taking points off each other. So that's where I think the other element of the Ferrari threat dwindling comes from, because Leclerc's definitely going to be good enough to win races, but if he can't string together a championship challenge, is actually what he's going to do just hurt Vettel's push.
The other thing we have to consider, of course, is the dynamic in Mercedes. It looks kind of sewn up. Hamilton, as you say, he's been performing better than ever. There's no threat from within anymore. Bottas isn't quite on Hamilton's level, and it's not as toxic as the days of Nico Rosberg at Mercedes. But Hamilton always talks every year about, how do I raise the bar? How do I go to the next level? That's what's motivating him in Formula One at the moment. Where does he go? How does he get even better than he was this year? It's so hard to maintain that kind of relentless momentum winning championships. It looks easy from the outside, but it isn't. And Vettel himself has said, you have to enjoy those days because they might not come again. There is a chance, a small one, that Hamilton might stagnate because he can't find that new place to raise the bar, or maybe he just can't quite find the energy to go yet again. We'll see. That's probably particularly speculative, but you never know. Things change quite frequently in Formula One in unexpected ways.
There are only so many glass ceilings you can smash through, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
We very briefly mentioned at the beginning that we've seen a little bit of Verstappen versus Hamilton on track, particularly towards the end of 2018 when Red Bull really got its act together. Have we seen enough from their interactions on the track, and I think crucially off it, and little discussions in the podium room and that sort of thing? Do we have an inkling of how that rivalry could play out if, and of course this is a massive if, Honda gives Red Bull a powerful enough and reliable enough engine that Red Bull's in the fight throughout the season? What do you think we've seen so far? And is Hamilton already ready for that challenge, or do you think he's still putting in some groundwork perhaps for when Verstappen is the next big rival?
I think it's impossible for him to have completely worked Max out yet. As you say, they've had a couple of little dances, but the playing field has not been equal. Hamilton's been going for a championship. Verstappen's had nothing to lose because, although obviously he wants to win races, Red Bull hasn't been in title contention. So Verstappen can afford to get his elbows out, can afford to be particularly aggressive. Hamilton, as we saw in their battle in Austin, had to be a bit circumspect. But the way they talk about those incidents out of the car suggests they're both very respectful of each other and can see that when the stars finally do align and there's a battle of equals, it's not going to be straightforward for either of them to get the better of the other.
I suspect that Verstappen has probably got just a little bit on Hamilton now, on one lap pace. I think it's got to that point now where...
Really?
Yeah, I think so, because you had that point when Hamilton burst onto the scene in F1, and obviously he was so Senna inspired. There were all of these comparisons to Senna, but he's a bit more Prost now. He's older, he's wiser, he's still quick, still very quick, but he's that all-round package.
And Prost was quicker than people ever gave him
credit.
Yeah,
exactly, and it's just that all-round package. He's just so smart. It's difficult to see how you beat Hamilton over a season at the moment if he's got a good car. Whereas Verstappen is that raw, rough.
Balls out.
Yeah, I don't think I'm in the wrong even when I'm in the wrong. He is the embodiment of Senna's very flawed, if you don't go for a gap, you're not a racing driver philosophy. That's what Verstappen believes. So that's the sort of roles I think they're taking. But I think that Verstappen's weakness is that I don't see him being able to be the complete driver over a season. He says...
Not yet. That's certainly the case. I think Hamilton can... He mentioned it after Brazil, didn't he? I know that incident with Ocon is very particular, and you can argue different cases on both sides, but Hamilton can see that Max can lose his rag quite easily. He can maybe have a little bit too much tunnel vision on the moment rather than thinking about the bigger picture, and that is something for him to exploit. So, and it's kind of natural considering the stage they are at in their respective careers.
Well, it's age and experience, isn't it?
Exactly. And Max is obviously a fantastic talent and is probably the driver that Hamilton is most wary of these emerging threats, but he still isn't quite the rounded package. So heading into the new season, Hamilton still has that small measure over him, I think.
Well, there were the comments from Verstappen the other day, looking back at the criticism he threw at Renault constantly over the second half of the year, and he said, "Oh well, you just have to accept when you're in the wrong. I know when I'm in the wrong. Blah blah blah. All of this is like, well, actually, there's mounting evidence over the course of this year that you don't know how to accept that you're wrong." And Lewis knows that.
Only in hindsight, though. That's the thing, isn't it? Max needs a lot of time to process everything and then climb down from whatever soapbox he's climbed up onto. Whereas Lewis, probably partly over just the benefit of experience, like you say, Glenn, he knows how to make those judgments sooner and crucially in the moment, which means he doesn't get into these kind of scrapes with other people.
So I can see that. I don't necessarily think it will ever escalate to the sort of poison that we had between Hamilton and Rosberg, but I can if Verstappen emerges as a title candidate, I can see him and Lewis being the sort of head-to-head adversaries that results in a little bit of mental, mind game kind of thing, as well as the on-track warfare.